The first sound I heard after they buried my husband was a knock at the door I had not invited. It was a Tuesday. Jonas had been in the ground 4 days. The house still smelled like the food the women had brought. Casseroles and pies and bread stacked on every surface. Because that is what a community does when a man dies. It feeds his widow so she does not have to think about feeding herself. I had not eaten any of it. I was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, my hands flat on the wood Jonas had built himself 31 years ago, when we were young and the future was a field we had not yet walked into. And then the knock came. I opened the door. It was Bishop Reuben. He was holding his hat in his hands, which I recognized as a gesture of respect. He said he had come to pray with me. I stepped aside and let him in. He sat at my table. He prayed. And then, before he stood to leave, he said something I was not prepared for. He said that he hoped I would be open to what the community might offer me in the coming months, that there were good men who would see to my household, that a woman my age, with children still needing guidance, should not carry what was ahead of her alone. He said it gently. He said it with his hat in his hands and his eyes full of what looked like kindness. And I stood at my own door and nodded because I did not yet have words for what I was feeling, which was not gratitude. Something I would spend the next 12 years fighting. I was 47 years old. I had buried a husband. And I was already being told what came next. Stay with me. Because what I am about to tell you about what Amish elders are permitted to demand from a widow who refuses to remarry is going to make you angry. And if you grew up in a world like mine, it is going to feel very, very familiar. My name is Anna. I grew up Old Order Amish in Geauga County, Ohio. I left some years ago, and this channel, Hannah the Amish Girl, is where I finally say the things my community would never allow me to say out loud. If you want to hear more hidden truths like this one, please subscribe and tap the like button and drop your city or country in the comments. I read every single one. Let me explain something that took me years of therapy to fully understand. In Old Order Amish theology, widowhood is not a permanent state. It is a temporary problem. A woman alone is a household out of order, and an out-of-order household is a disruption to the body of the community. This is not cruelty, or at least it is not experienced as cruelty by the people enforcing it. It is theology. It is order. And in Geauga County, in my district, the theology of remarriage for a widow rested on 3 pillars, and not one of them had anything to do with what the widow herself wanted. The first pillar is the household as witness. An Amish home is not just a place to live. It is a testimony to the community and to God. A home with a man at its head testifies to proper order. A home without one testifies to disorder, to something incomplete, to something that must be corrected. The second pillar is the widow's vulnerability as spiritual risk. A woman alone, the elders believed, was more susceptible to pride, independence, and worldly influence. Not because she was weak, but because without the structure of headship, she had no protection against her own judgment. Her judgment on its own was not considered sufficient. Her judgment needed a man to sanctify it. The third pillar is the community's responsibility over her. Because I was part of the body, the elders had a duty toward me. Leaving me alone in their framework was not respecting my wishes. It was negligence. They were responsible for my soul. And a soul in an unordered household was a soul at risk. All 3 pillars together produced something very specific. The belief that my refusal to remarry was not a personal choice. It was a spiritual problem. And spiritual problems in old order communities do not go unaddressed. Jonas and I had been married 23 years when he died. He was 51, a brain sickness that moved faster than any of us could follow. 6 months from the first symptom to the last morning. We had raised 5 children in that house. We had built the addition together when the 3rd child came. I knew the sound of his breathing in the dark so well that for months after he died, I would wake in the night certain I had heard it, and lie there in the silence understanding again that I had not. Grief is not one thing. It is many things wearing the same coat. What I felt in the first year was not just the loss of Jonas. It was the loss of the shape of my own life. I did not know, at 47, who I was without the structure of that marriage. Every morning I had known for 23 years what the day would hold, not because it was easy, but because the frame was familiar. I knew which side of the bed to rise from. I knew whose boots would need cleaning by the door. I knew the weight of cooking for a man who was hungry from real labor. That knowing was gone. And I was learning, slowly and without any guide, how to inhabit a life whose shape I had not yet seen. I needed time. I asked for time. What I received instead was attention. The first proposal came 8 months after Jonas was buried. A widower from the next district over, a man I had met perhaps a dozen times at church events. He was 60, quiet, with grown children, who needed a grandmother more than he needed a wife. He did not come to me himself. He sent word through Bishop Reuben, who came again to my table, hat in hands, to present the matter. I said I was not ready. Reuben nodded and said he understood. He also said that the community would be watching to ensure I was managing well. I understood what that meant. It meant the clock had started. The watching was not invisible. That is the thing people outside my world do not fully understand about how Amish authority operates. It does not come through locked doors or raised voices. It comes through presence, through visits, through the slow accumulation of small comments that add up to enormous pressure. Within the first year, deacons had noted that I had not attended a particular Sunday singing, even though I was in mourning. An elder's wife had mentioned to my oldest daughter that my house seemed quiet, which was meant as an observation, but my daughter understood it the same way I did when she told me. Women from the community came to quilt on Wednesdays, perfectly normal, perfectly kind. And in the middle of the quilting, conversation would turn naturally, gently, to so-and-so's cousin who had remarried after 18 months and how well she was doing, how settled her household was, how peaceful her children seemed. The message was always delivered wrapped in something that looked like care. That is what made it so difficult to refuse. How do you push back against a casserole? How do you name a pressure that never announces itself? You cannot. You absorb it, or you go numb to it, and either way, it changes you. By the 2nd year, I had received 4 proposals, all through the bishop or a deacon. I had refused all 4. By the 3rd year, the conversations at quilting had shifted. They were less about the joy of remarried widows and more about the difficulty of a woman managing a household alone, the spiritual danger of isolation, the importance of having a man to guide the important decisions. I was not managing alone. I was managing fine. I was keeping the garden, running the household, finishing the quilts, attending every service. But that observation did not matter inside the framework they were using, because the framework was not about my actual capacity. It was about order, and order in their understanding had a shape, That shape required a man at the head of it. My competence was beside the point. What happened over the next 11 Sundays I cannot carry in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold. The names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I wrote it all down. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and in the first pinned comment. But let me tell you what it came to. In the 4th year, a formal conversation was convened. Not a ban, not a shunning. Not yet, but something with weight to it. I sat across from Bishop Reuben and 2 deacons at the home of an elder I respected. They were kind in their voices. They told me they were concerned for my soul, that a woman of 49 had many years ahead of her, and those years needed order. That my continued refusal was beginning to look, they said carefully, like hochmut, pride, that word. In the Amish world, that word is the heaviest stone they can lay on you. I sat with my hands in my lap, and I said that I did not believe refusing to marry a man I did not love was pride. I believed it was honesty. The elder I respected looked at me for a long moment, and then looked at his hands. Reuben said that love was not the point. Suitability was the point. Stability was the point. Order was the point. I said I understood their concern. I said I would pray about it. I went home, and I sat at Jonas's table, and I put my hands flat on the wood he had built, and I did not cry. I had been through enough of it by then to know that crying changed nothing. What I needed was something else. What I needed was to understand what they were actually permitted to do to me. Because hochmut was not an accusation without consequences in my community. If the elders determined that a member was living in pride, persistently and without repentance, the steps that followed were prescribed. First, repeated counsel. Then, if counsel failed, withdrawal of certain community privileges, exclusion from communion, and if that failed, the fullmeldung, the shunning. You stop eating at the same table as your family. They stop accepting anything from your hand. You are present in the community as a warning, not a member. I had watched it happen to others, for different reasons, but the shape of it was the same. And I want you to understand something clearly. I was not being threatened with shunning for adultery. I was not being threatened with shunning for abandoning my faith, or my children, or my obligations. I was being threatened with shunning for refusing to marry a man I did not choose. That is the whole of it. That is what the structure permitted them to do. My daughter Rebecca was 26 at this time. She was still inside the community, married, raising her own children. When I told her what had happened in that meeting, she went quiet, in the way that meant she was frightened. Not of me, for me. She said, "Anna, please, just consider it, not for them, for us, so we can sit at the same table." I held her face in my hands, this daughter I had raised, and I understood what I was asking her to carry. It was not a small thing. The community was her world, her husband's family, her children's school, her daily bread. All of it existed inside those boundaries. My refusal had consequences that did not fall only on me. That is the architecture of the system. That is how it works. A woman's individual choice is never only hers, because her standing inside the community is threaded through everyone she loves. Refusing becomes an act that punishes the people you are trying to protect. I nearly relented. I want to tell you that honestly. I sat at Jonas's table more than once and thought that one more marriage, a quiet one, a manageable one, was a smaller price than watching my daughter carry my resistance inside her every Sunday morning. The night after, I nearly said yes to the 5th proposal. I could not sleep. I lay in the dark and I went through it logically, the way you go through a farm ledger, column by column. On one side, the peace, the table, my daughter's relief, the end of the cold Sundays. On the other, the man I did not know, the bed I would share with him, the years ahead. I lay there until the rooster started and the sky went pale at the edges, and when I rose I knew that a ledger was the wrong tool for this. Some things are not columns. Some things are simply yours, or they are not. My choice was mine. And I had not been given it by the community, which meant the community could not take it. But I kept coming back to one thing. If I married to keep the peace, I was teaching my daughters and my granddaughters that peace was something women purchased with themselves. I was not willing to teach that, not even for the table. The pressure never became a formal shunning, though it came close. What broke the immediate crisis was something I had not expected. An older woman in the community, a widow herself who had remarried and then been widowed a second time, came to my house alone one afternoon. She was in her early 70s. She had lived more of this than I had. She sat across from me at Jonas's table, in the chair where the bishop had once sat, and the difference between those two visits was not lost on me. The bishop had come with authority. She came with knowledge. And knowledge, I was about to learn, was the more powerful of the two. She said very quietly, without any framing or preamble, "They cannot make you, not really, not if you hold." She told me about the limits. She told me that the community's authority over a widow was enormous in practice and surprisingly narrow in actual church law, if a woman knew how to hold herself inside it. Attend every Sunday. Tithe. Serve. Keep your household visible and orderly. Give them nothing they can officially name as sin. They can counsel you forever. They can make your Sundays cold. They can speak at you from the deacon's bench until your ears ring. But if you attend and you serve and you give them no sin to name, the formal proceedings have nothing to hold on to. She had learned this the hard way in her second widowhood. She had decided she would not take a third husband. She had held for 9 years. I sat across from her and felt something I can only describe as the floor coming back under my feet. I had not known there was a floor. I had been in free fall since that 4th year meeting. And this woman, who owed me nothing, had come to show me where the ground was. That afternoon, everything shifted. I went back to Jonas's table that evening, and I sat for a long time in the dark, not in grief this time, not in fear, in something that felt for the first time since the funeral like clarity. I knew what I was going to do. I was going to attend every Sunday. I was going to tithe. I was going to serve. And I was going to say no until they ran out of men to propose to me, or until I ran out of years, whichever came first. I held for 8 more years after that conversation, 47 to 59. 12 years total of proposals I refused, of Sundays that were cold, of quilting conversations I sat through without flinching, of deacon visits I received with my hands flat on Jonas's table, and my voice steady and my attendance record unbroken. My daughter Rebecca moved through complicated feelings about all of it, and we talked about those feelings, really talked, in a way I am not sure we would have if I had simply capitulated. By the time I left the community, and the reasons for leaving were my own and took their own years, Rebecca had watched me hold for over a decade. She has told me since that watching it changed something in her, changed what she believed her own choices were permitted to be. I did not plan to teach her that. I was only trying to survive. But that is sometimes how the most important things get passed on, not through instruction, but through witness. My therapist told me something I have thought about every day since. She said, "They had authority over your community standing. They had no authority over your knowledge of yourself, and you never confused the two." I did not know in those early years that what I was doing was refusing to confuse those two things. I only knew that every time I came close to a yes, something in me went still and quiet and entirely certain. Jonas had built that table. My hands knew the wood, and I was not going to leave it for an ordered household I had not chosen. What they were permitted to do was this. They were permitted to counsel me, exclude me from communion temporarily, remove certain community privileges, and initiate formal proceedings toward shunning. What they could not do was make me say yes. That is the whole of it. And it took me 12 years, and a woman who came to my door in the afternoon to understand it clearly. The Amish world gave me things I carry always: the sound of a community that knows your name, a faith I have rebuilt in my own hands, strange and personal, and more honest than anything I performed on those cold Sundays. Children and grandchildren I love past any ability to say it. But there is no theology that requires a woman to place herself into a marriage she has not chosen because it is more convenient for the body of the community than her refusal is. There is no scripture that makes her grief into a problem to be solved by a stranger at her table. And there is no God I believe in now who looked at that widow sitting alone at the wood her husband built and thought, what she needs is to be told her solitude is sin. The table is still in my kitchen. I kept it when I left. It was the one piece of furniture I would not leave behind. Jonas built it from oak he felled himself, before we were married, before we had a household to put it in. He built it because he believed we would have one. That faith, his faith in our future, lives in the wood. When I run my hands across it now, in a house that is entirely mine, in a morning that belongs to no one but me, I think about all the women who sat at tables they did not choose, in households built by decisions made without them. I think about what it costs to hold. And I think it was worth every cold Sunday I refused for 12 years, and I would refuse again. If you grew up in a world where your choices belong to the community before they belong to you, I see you. If you have ever sat across a table from people who told you your grief had a deadline, I see you. If you have ever nearly said yes to something wrong because you loved someone who needed you to, I see you too. You are not wrong for holding. Holding is its own kind of faithfulness. Leave me a comment. Tell me what surprised you. Tell me if you have ever been pressured the way I was, in your own community, in your own family, in your own life. And if you want to keep hearing from behind the prayer cap, subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. I have so many more truths waiting. The Sundays, what 20 minutes cannot hold. Link in the description and in the first pinned comment. The morning is yours if you decide it is. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.